Joining me right back here for the fourth segment on today's show. Right before I jump into the Steelers and their new offensive coordinator, Arthur Smith, I wanted to remind you guys once again, if you have any questions or comments on today's show, to use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, GSMCPodcast.net. By doing this, I'll be able to see your question or comment and read it on air and get your guys' thoughts on anything I say or on any of the topics we have left on today's show. It's a massive help for the network and this show as well, so please, if you would, use the tip and donations link, GSMCPodcast.net, with any of your questions or comments. In saying that, the new offensive coordinator, we just got finished talking about how the Bills are going to change their offense in the last segment. Now, a big change is coming to the Pittsburgh Steelers in Arthur Smith. Obviously, still recovering from that Matt Canada era and all these struggles, all the chants you heard from the crowd, fire Canada, that were repeatedly said, not just at football games, but at hockey games and stuff like that. Really telling you how the city of Pittsburgh felt about that offense. Then you had some interim offensive coordinators there to end the year, and it seemed as a miracle that they made the playoffs overall in 2023. And now you finally get an experienced guy with a established resume, I think, more so as an offensive coordinator in the NFL rather than maybe a head coach, because a lot of people, I think, will really piece their impression of Arthur Smith just based on last year. And he was a head coach, and I know he was probably mostly in charge of really calling the plays on offense. And as a head coach still, I think there's more responsibility, just other things you have to worry about as a head coach rather than as an offensive coordinator, just solely focusing in on the offense, calling those plays, and just focusing on nothing else but that. I think makes it a little bit easier for Arthur Smith, and I think just suits him better realistically for this Pittsburgh Steelers team. And one of the biggest things that they really want to emphasize, and that he has done well over his last few years, is run the ball. They have two capable running backs in Najee Harris and in Jaylen Warren. So that's sort of the idea that Arthur Smith will really try to build on with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And so far, 2 weeks into the OTA period of the offseason, a lot of positive reviews on Arthur Smith so far. The Pittsburgh Steelers players are really loving what he has brought already to this offense. And some players, I forget who it was, but I know, I think it was Jaylen Warren that was having an interview, and he said that the main difference was just night and day from what they had last year to this year. And specifically with Arthur Smith is the attention to detail and just him being vocal about everything and really being a presence out there and coaching up some of these players on offense is really being the main difference so far that I picked out from the articles and from the information I picked out as well. It seems like he's very meticulous about his offense and the why he does something, why they scheme something a certain way, or why they block it this way. With a lot of motion on this offense as well, he's very intentional about explaining everything and being vocal about it to the players. That was something that really stood out to me because according to the article I read, it seemed like Matt Canada wasn't that. The offense sort of struggled with the simplified version of this offense from Matt Canada. And it was interesting because last year a story came out from The Athletic, or just the Pittsburgh local media, from a former tight end in Jace Sternberger for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he played for the Green Bay Packers and the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they asked him about the comparison within those offenses of Matt LaFleur and Matt Canada. And really, the biggest point that he made was that that Matt LaFleur in Green Bay, he said that the difference was just night and day from that and from what he experienced with Matt Canada, because the offense in Matt Canada, in his words, was very simplified. He only had the option of running one thing a certain way. So say it was a slant route, I think this was the example that he used. If he was running a stick or a slant route, that was what he was supposed to do. And if that wasn't there, it was like, oh, well, it's covered. You don't really have another option to move off of that. Whereas in Green Bay, he explained that Matt LaFleur really made it a point where, yeah, you have maybe a slant route to run, but you have to read the defense, and that way you either decide with keeping that slant or shortening it up and making it a stick route, or maybe changing it altogether, and you have a third option to run to, as opposed to just, you have this route to run in Pittsburgh, and if that's not there, the quarterback has to look somewhere else. You have no other option, and I think it's very early stage of football, like high school, I guess college level as well, where these players only have one thing to run and one thing to base it off of. They're not really reading the defense, and if it's not there, it's whatever. We'll look at the next guy, and at this level, you can't get by with just doing that, because defenses and defensive coordinators are way too smart to not pick up on that. It seemed like the Steelers just were allergic to throwing over the middle of the field, and that's where the lack of options with some of these runs comes up and really becomes a problem, because now if you have no options in the middle of the field, the harder throws are on the outside, and the quarterback play wasn't great last year, and mixing that all together, you get the sort of production you get last year from the Steelers, and it seems like this year that's really changing. Talking to Isaac Seumalo, the local media was, and getting his thoughts on what Arthur Smith is like so far, he said, I think he's made everyone super accountable, where, I think it starts with the players, but it's good to have from the coaches as well. I think he's been consistent with his messages so far, wanting guys to prove themselves each and every day to their teammates. So bringing up the intensity, bringing up just the accountability and the attention to detail is what I got from that quote from Isaac Seumalo. So another thing that's positive about Arthur Smith, and we just finished talking about the Atlanta Falcons and their tight end production recently over the last few years with Arthur Smith being there. Now you have another good young tight end in Pat Freiermuth in this offense, and how he becomes incorporated now, I think, is another point where it gets a lot of fans excited. It gets a lot of local media excited as well, because they point to the fact that over his time in Atlanta, Arthur Smith threw it to the tight ends over 1/3 of the time, or over 1/3 of the plays ran in their offense with his time being in Atlanta. And over that time period, it was one of the highest percentages thrown to tight ends in the NFL, whereas the Steelers in Matt Canada's offense had the lower number, one of the lowest numbers throwing to tight ends in the NFL. So a big year could be coming in for Pat Freiermuth. They asked him about it, and he said that he's very excited and he can't wait to get out there on the field and really execute these plays, because Arthur Smith, again, is making it a point of emphasis to try and get those guys involved. And if you know how the tight end lines up in football, they usually line up in the slot or closer to the offensive line and really attack that middle of the field, which again goes back to the last point I made, really making it a point of emphasis to try and incorporate at least something over the middle of the field, because if everything's on the outsides, one, it's harder, like I said before, and again, defenses just pick up on it. It's a harder throw to make for the quarterbacks, and you just become predictable. Then the running game can't get going, and you have a lot of low-scoring games like the Steelers did have last year. So everything seems to be a complete 180 as of right now with Arthur Smith and his offense. I'm sure they're going to want to run the ball a lot more. They drafted a couple of offensive linemen in the first couple of rounds in the NFL draft, so I'm sure that's going to be the main point of Arthur Smith's offense. It was something Matt Canada tried to do, but it didn't really work out because of the scheme, and they didn't really have the level at offensive line that they do now, in my opinion. So you have that similar aspect, but overall with the rest of it, I think Arthur Smith will bring a different dimension to this Pittsburgh Steelers offense, and really just incorporating everybody and getting everybody to play to the best of their abilities. I'm excited, not just because of a fan of the Steelers, but I think this team is very talented, and again, to keep them as the underdogs, I think they thrive in that situation with that narrative. I won't be surprised if they're competing towards the end of the year. By the time that does come, though, they will be playing the hardest schedule in the NFL. So if they make make it to the playoffs, I think it'll be even more impressive with that end of regular season schedule that they have. But I believe they'll be competitive. I think they have the pieces now, the right scheme to do it. I'm looking forward to watching them in 2024. But in saying that, we'll leave it at that, and we'll move on to the next segment, the last segment of the show, when we return from this break, on the Indianapolis Colts and how they're really excited and looking forward to 2024 to incorporate a new sort of weapon that they weren't able to incorporate last season because of all those injuries. Stick around to find out what that really is. We'll be right back in a few moments here.